What's going in? Wonder if there's like a fade in I can have behind that intro. But oh yeah, I forgot to hit record. All right, yeah, we did it. Oh God, what am I doing? Forgot to turn that off. Mike Benz was on Rogan today.
Joe Rogan podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan.
I got to say, the last couple podcasts that Rogan has had with Mike Benz has been. I've had to listen to him at least like 3 or 4 times to try to absorb as much as I can. And even then, looking back on it, I'm like, God, there's so much. USAID was one of the biggest like wormholes I've ever seen in my entire life. But yeah, this will probably be interesting.
Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
All day.
All right. What a day to have you in here, buddy.
Kid in a candy shop. We hacked the government. We hacked the government's files, evidently. I mean, we have 3.5 million files that it feels like we should not have.
Pretty quiet.
It would have been great to have had 7 years ago in 2019 when this was being litigated, but it's an incredible moment of transparency for how the world works, how governments interact with the private sector and funds, and it's just really cool to be a part of it.
What was the holdup? What was because it seemed like there was a lot of people that did not want these files released.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot. What we have access to now are internal documents from the Justice Department and the FBI that are normally, even though they're not classified, they are part of a criminal investigation, and so they're not normally disclosable to the public. It could be the case that it kind of required a congressional bill to force this out. Like when you...
Just testing the audio.
If there's a internal investigation and it's not a part of a court document that's entered into evidence, you can't just FOIA the Justice Department to get dirt on your political enemies because you think that they might be involved in something. Now, I don't know if it could have been done through an executive order around Epstein transparency around the time of the first binders. Certainly, it looked like there was friction between the president and Thomas Massie over this issue. But I don't know the details of what went down there. But the fact is, the bill passed 427-1 in the House.
Who's the one?
My recollection is that it was Randy Fine, but I might be wrong on that, so I don't want to smear.
There was one person
imply
that
anything unduly.
Didn't want it released because they thought it would compromise the victims, right? At one point in time, at least.
Yeah,
Oh no, I remember that. Wasn't that like a month or 2 ago? I do remember something about that. And I think he came out and made a video as to why, but it's not like it was very believable. It was just kind of weird. It's like, you're the one dude, and hey, kudos to you if you are really doing the right thing, but it really didn't seem like it.
I don't know what the rationale, is, and because I don't recall offhand who the one is, I don't want to lean on that too much, but the fact is nobody wanted to be on the other side of this. I can't think of anything that both Republicans and Democrats voted on 427-1 and... Oh, I'm sorry, Clay Higgins. Sorry. Apologies to Randy Fine. So there was there was obviously friction because this implicates everybody, Republicans and Democrats, Americans and a dozen different foreign countries, heads of major hedge funds and multinational corporations, donors to all political parties, major university and science institutions. Almost every major player in world affairs was in some way either involved in or adjacent to this network, or the network tried to reach out to them because they were influential. And so, there was kind of a mutually assured destruction around the Epstein hot potato for a decade now, which is that, out of power, the Republicans said, oh, the Democrats are don't want to disclose this because of the Clintons. And then the Trump administration gets into power, and there's a very slow, reaction to the kind of disclosures that culminated in what happened this week. And so you had the Democrats saying, oh, they're not disclosing it because of, Trump World and his associates. Meanwhile, they controlled the Justice Department and the FBI for 4 years and didn't release any. So it took a moment like this. And what's really interesting about it is this bill only compelled the disclosure, this law that passed in Congress only compelled the disclosure of Justice Department originated files. Justice Department, by extension, FBI is the investigative arm of the Justice Department. It does not compel CIA originated files. And one of the coolest moments of transparency we had last year in 2025 was when Tulsi Gabbard, as the ODNI, as the head of director of national intelligence in charge of the whole intelligence community, spearheaded the JFK files release. And we got basically fully unredacted documents. Now, I know there's a contest over how complete they are, but the fact is it was hundreds of thousands of files that had never been seen before, or unredacted versions of documents that had been fully or partially redacted for decades. The only reason that we have JFK files at all is because in 1992, Congress passed a bill to force the CIA to start turning over documents. The law, I believe, was called the JFK Records Collection Act. And it forced, by law, the CIA to establish this independent presidential assassination review board that would review documents for declassification and compel, on the basis of that independent body. Given all of the intelligence intrigue around Epstein and the fact that it is, in my view, physically impossible over Epstein's 40-year career in intelligence-adjacent work that there's not Epstein files that are CIA originated. And we actually, I saw this in the files that were just released. Jeffrey Epstein himself twice FOIA'd. That's the Freedom of Information Act, which is a law that I think came around in 1966, which allows any U.S. citizen to ask any government agency for all public records that it has about anything. There are certain things that get blocked in that. There were a lot of FOIA fights about COVID. Fauci, famously, there's this exchange where one of the folks in Fauci world says that they learned cool tricks from the FOIA lady about how to get around requests. But the fact is you can FOIA the CIA for records because that FOIA forces the CIA to give you declassified or unclassified records. And if it's classified, it'll issue a GLOMAR, we cannot confirm or deny and the existence or non-existence of classified information.
Can we, before we get any further, the JFK stuff, I never heard anything about it. I mean, I know the files came out, but there was no big revelations. There was was there anything that came out of that was significant?
I thought it was huge. I learned, I guess people are looking at the JFK files. Most people are looking at it for clues as to who killed JFK.
Right.
And I know that there are many researchers who specialize in the JFK assassination.
Just tell us already.
That have sharpened their theories, I
never gonna
suppose,
know.
on the
We're never
basis
gonna
of
know.
it in a useful way for whatever it's worth. For me, I was never expecting to see a CIA document saying, I, James Jesus Angleton, authorized the assassination of the President of the United States. But the fact is what it revealed were all of these tangential and ancillary documents that showed the structure of intelligence work at a very fine and detailed level, the kind of revelations that really only come around once in a generation. There's a video online by Michael Parenti, who was a CIA whistleblower around the time of the Iran-Contra hearings in the 1980s. And he says, pay attention to these hearings. This may be the last time for another 20, 30, 40 years that you ever get an inside look at the detailed minutia of a covert operation, because all of this was being blasted on a congressional jumbotron with hearings and formal congressional investigations and public testimony. And I sort of look at the JFK files release like that. We got a very detailed look at everything that was happening around effectively Operation Mongoose, because...
Can you refresh my memory? What was Mongoose?
Yeah, I was about to look it up for us, but yeah. Just
again?
Yeah,
so there was Operation Mongoose and Operation Condor, which were related to the... Nominally, what you'll read is that they were related to the attempts by the CIA for Mongoose, for example, to destabilize the government of Cuba in order to induce a regime change. But because those efforts proved unsuccessful, they regionalized the conflict to do counter-communism work effectively throughout all of Latin America, the Caribbean, South America. And Operation Condor was effectively a kind of counterinsurgency strategy to stop the rise of left-wing Marxist groups who were trying to throw off the yoke of American imperialism, so to speak, as they put it. And so you had a massive CIA operation to try to tilt the internal politics of basically every country south of the border. And we got incredibly just detailed. I'll give you an example of one declassified document that's really wild. There's one document that is a CIA file with instructions to
that's not cool.
Delete all physical copies of the document at the end that describes how the agency had internally authorized an attempt to assassinate, Castro by working through the Meyer-Lansky syndicate and hiring two hitmen that were in Miami and then had contacts with the Cuban exile community liaisons within Cuba. And so this was a formal agency file that described how a CIA case officer made contact with people from the mob, organized crime, with offers of payoffs, with very detailed logistics. You can find this. I did a whole video on it on my subscriber thing. I'll put it on the top of my social media. But it also describes a really interesting Jeffrey Epstein-like figure. Robert Mayhew was a CIA asset. The JFK files, they describe how they got they sponsored a movie to simulate, I believe it was the president of Indonesia, having an affair with a blonde woman. They filmed basically like a porno that would to create a tape, and they describe how they set up the room to make it look like it was, I think, in the presidential palace or some hotel room that would have been in that country, in order to create what's effectively a sexual blackmail tape
scandal
that could then be leaked to the press in order to...
That would make a really funny sketch if somebody... Yeah, man. Making it just so obvious and so sloppy that it's like a fake. It's like, but it's just one of those other countries, like, they don't have Hollywood like we do.
Discredit the president. And you look at these in formal agency files, and on the one hand you go, okay, that was the 1960s. That was the early 1960s. That was before there was any oversight on the CIA at all. it wasn't until the Church Committee hearings in 1975, 1976, that we even had congressional oversight of the CIA. There was no Senate Intelligence Committee. There was no House Intelligence Committee at the time. And at that point, assassinations had not been outlawed. I mean, the CIA was allowed to assassinate people. There's since been a ban on that. So you go, okay, that's 60 years ago. But the fact is they did it. The fact is that is within the array of options that folks in covert operations saw as on the table.
Working with the mob.
Now, but that goes back a long time. I found it totally unsurprising. It's one of these things. It's just kind of the general theme. It's shocked but not surprised. You know, it's like, holy crap, they put this in writing? Well, what are we doing here, guys? But you're like, but I'm not surprised they did it because I know they were doing all these other things. The fact is the CIA was working with the mob before there was a CIA. Before it was done by the CIA, work with, for example, the Italian mob was done through the Department of War really starting in the 1930s, and then especially in the 1940s, because they were the Central Intelligence Agency. Well, at the time it was the OSS in the 1940s, but it would become the CIA. One of their main logistical points of contact and allies for the resistance against Mussolini in Italy.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Mussolini was cracking down both on the Vatican Church and on the Italian mafia. And so The Restrained Bedfellows. There's a great book on this by Paul Williams. I think it was published in 2017. It's called Operation Gladio, the CIA, the Vatican, and the Mob. And I recommend this book.
I love that I talk about something and it comes back the next friggin' day. I love it. I love how this works. I swear to God, we're in a simulation.
To everyone, because it's a really, really detailed academic deep dive on this nexus between a religious institution, an intelligence agency, an illegal organized crime syndicate that...
And I'll say, if anybody's going to talk about, like, introduce this type of idea to you, this is the guy. He knows this type of thing. This is his specialty. So it's like, he is one of the greatest people to listen to when it comes to this type of thing.
Does all manner of black ops, and it especially focuses on the funding relationship. In fact, this just came out, and this sort of gets to the utility of these documents. There's an incredible document that just was released this week where Larry Summers, who was the head of the U.S. Treasury, so not only was he the head of Harvard University and the head of the American money system, but he says he's trying to explain to Jeffrey Epstein kind of the politics of what's happening in the Vatican. And what he says to him is that what's actually most important going on right now is what's happening with the Vatican Bank, which is kind of the deep politics of the Vatican. And I saw this email and I just laughed and did a little twirly thing in my chair, because it's totally unsurprising if you read that book Operation Gladio that I mentioned. It traces 80 years of this, because the Vatican Bank was the first offshore bank before offshore banking even existed. It was there was an alliance with the Vatican Bank during World War II itself with our Department of War and with organized crime outfits, at least according to the evidence that I find persuasive in this book, and that appears to be validated by Italian court documents in the 1990s when all of this was litigated. Incidentally, that was when the mob was really prosecuted for the first time. But effectively what happened was you had strange bedfellows. You had the United States, who wanted to get rid of Mussolini. You had the Vatican, who wanted to get rid of Mussolini. And you had organized crime, who wanted to get rid of Mussolini. And because organized crime is very deep in the logistics and unions, they control the ports, they control the streets, they control safe houses. And if they have allies in a bank, they are able to launder money effectively in order to do black market, type trade. And if you have, for example, the support of the U.S. government to facilitate that, and there's protection offered to those organized crime groups, what you end up having is effectively state-sponsored, a state-sponsored mafia with an untouchable bank. And at the time, and Larry Summers explains this to Jeffrey Epstein in very simple terms, which is, here you go. The most important change in the Vatican may not be Pope Benedict's sudden retirement, but change in leadership of the Institute for Works of Religion, the Vatican's bank. Because of the Vatican's status as a sovereign country, it's exempt from transparency rules of not only Italy, but of the European Union. This status allows its elite clients to evade any scrutiny in their money transfers. Last May, Vatican Bank president was fired after Italian authorities opened an investigation into a far-flung bribery scheme. And he goes through this, but what's important here is the British, when we think of offshore banking now, it's usually associated with Cayman Islands, Jersey, Man, Panama, but Panama's sort of a different story. But it's usually associated with these kind of small island countries that are formerly, kind of their own territory, their own sort of sovereign territory. You also see this within the United States in Indian, Native American reservations with these kind of autonomous zones that can be shielded from certain kinds of public disclosures that a typical finance institution.
That's going on with Native American banks?
Well, yeah, this was actually part of...
Is that connected to the casinos? Because they have a lot of money from the casinos?
Yeah.
Super Bowl 60 deserves a sports book built.
That's interesting. Oh.
On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, pass-through of per-wager tax...
They threw the ad in right there, right when they start talking about casinos. Beautifully done, Joe.
May apply in Illinois. 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets which expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. In fact, if you watch The Octopus Murders, which I think was HBO or Netflix or one of those.
I heard it's great. I haven't seen it, but I heard it's awesome.
It's fantastic. And, it goes through how this was used effectively by the NSA during the Promise Software scandal and the Iran-Contra scandal of the 1980s, where you had basically the NSA and then the U.S. government running money laundering effectively through, casinos on Native American sovereign territory. But the fact is in the 1940s, the Vatican Bank was really the only game in town. This traces back at the CIA level to a lawyer named Paul Helliwell, who was kind of the architect of money laundering for the CIA. And it didn't even start really started with the attempt to try to stop Mao in the 1930s and 1940s. There were the Opium Wars in the 1830s, right, where effectively the British Empire and the East India Trading Company were making ungodly amounts of money by selling opium to China. They would grow the opium on the Golden Crescent or India, and then they would sell it to China with a huge customer base, which would bring in huge amounts of revenues to the British Crown. And then there were two opium wars that were fought in the 1830s and 50s, I believe, around then. And the Opium Wars were China's attempt to stop the import of opium into China because it had a huge, by that point,
it was bad.
Opium addiction problem. Opium dens in China were a massive issue within the country. They tried to ban it, and the British Crown pried open the narcotics market through a military conquest of parts of China. That's how Britain got control of Hong Kong, which remains a major narco-trafficking site connected to Jeffrey Epstein in very weird ways. I'll just sidebar that. But Mao rose to power to, in the name of his public campaign was about rejecting the century of humiliation between the 1830s and the 1930s. To support Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalists against the Chinese communists,
The what?
the War Department couldn't get enough congressional allocations, taxpayer money to support that, so they had to find some way to finance the forces that are now effectively Taiwan, because when they ultimately lost, they fled to the island of Formosa, which is now Taiwan. But they financed that initially, the War Department, the Chinese nationalists, through the narcotics trade, through basically the narcotics cultivated in the Gulf.
Sorry, I just realized I don't think you even need to record this, because if I'm streaming on YouTube, then it already records for me. That would save a lot of memory on my computer.
Golden Triangle. And these operations continued in Cambodia and Laos and were a big part of the JFK expansion of covert operations. To this day, in Fort Bragg, the Special Operations Training Center is called the JFK. This was a massive expansion of small wars, covert action instead of big military action, so it was mostly spearheaded by CIA rather than DOD or Department of War. But what happened is Paul Helliwell, in order to be able to traffic illegal narcotics, created a bunch of these CIA banking structures. One's called Castle Bank and Trust in the Cayman Islands, another one, Nugan Hand in Australia. And when you have that, friendly bank that's protected, then you can move drugs. This is this overworld, underworld alliance between intelligence and organized crime, because basically every intelligence operation is I don't want to say every, but at the operational level, it's a crime. It's an act of sabotage. It's an act of subversion. It's an act of obstruction. It's an act of illegal surveillance. So in order to do a illegal crime, you don't want to do it yourself, because then your fingerprints are on the gun. But if you know people who do illegal crimes for a living in an organized way and have experience in doing it, that allows you to be a very useful extension, and it gets justified in the name of national security. The illegal narcotics trade set up by Paul Helliwell, who would go on to be the main lawyer for Disney and set up Disney World in Orlando. You can look all this up. You can pull up Paul Helliwell's Wikipedia, or you can look at the history of Disney, or you can pull up Castle Bank and Trust. You can put any one of these up on screen. This is all fully declassified.
It really is wild how big the world is and how everything is just intertwined. Everything seems to be intertwined. How it's just like, now they're talking about, I know this is a crazy conspiracy theory, and I don't really buy it myself, but the whole Mom Donnie being Epstein's kid, it's like, what are the chances? Because we always talked about how Trudeau was Castro's kid. It's just like, it's just hilarious. It's just like, what if? I know it's crazy conspiracy theories, but what if? Oh, man. Too funny.
And so they then took that model to South America and Latin America and the Caribbean during Operation Condor, Operation Mongoose. And this is part of what gave rise to the Iran-Contra that spawned Jeffrey Epstein, which was the CIA got busted running the same thing it did in 1940s China, which was a drugs for cash for guns operation. You can't get enough money in USAID. In the 1940s, USAID didn't even exist. You can't get enough money from U.S. taxpayer dollars. You can't get enough money from private donors who will draft off of the regime change for their own profit. So how do you get your resistance rebels enough money? That usually comes down to black market trade, whether that's diamonds in Africa, whether that's illegal mining activities in South America, or whether that's narcotics. And it's the best things to use for this kind of covert financing are small, fungible, physical materials that can be converted into large sums of cash. For example, like a truck full of cocaine can fund an army. A truck full of copper can't. And so you had this state-sanctioned drug trade, this state-sanctioned illegal weapons logistics apparatus, and the state-sanctioned money laundering apparatus that started in the 1940s and was utilized throughout the entirety of the Cold War. On the mafia side, Operation Gladio was this stay-behind network, is what they said. Basically, these were right-wing groups, many or some of which were kind of Nazi-adjacent, who hated communism. And so even though we fought against the Nazis and Mussolini and Hitler in World War II, there was a utility to preserving a certain homegrown domestic network that really hated communism to assist us on the ground in the war against communism. And what you saw was in Operation Gladio, this was a NATO-wide...
And that makes me wonder if there was like an honest fear against communism, like a legit, like they really do think it's a monster, so they'll take whatever help that they can get. But is that believable? I don't know. I think you guys just wanted to get the best of the best, and you're like, well, we got them in a pincer move, so they'll be willing to come over and help us.
Covert.
And that's how NASA started, apparently.
Network, alliance of networks, a network of networks, that in basically every one of the NATO countries, there was a cell or a number of cluster cells that were set up in order to covertly influence the domestic politics of the country. And if you look at the members of these cluster cells, there's some of them, like Silvio Berlusconi was a part of the so-called P2 lounge that came up in the Operation Gladio files when the Italian government basically put all this on trial in the 1990s. And that structure is still used by intelligence today. If you go to my X feed and you look up, for example, Ann Applebaum and the thread that I did on the Integrity Initiative, if you just put Integrity Initiative in, I can show you what these cluster cells look like, and it's fascinating to look at the organizational structure of it. But I guess what I'm getting to here is with the mob and the Vatican at that time, that was the only game in town for offshore banking. If you wanted to have a bank that had no oversight whatsoever. When the British lost the Suez Canal in 1957 and basically had to give up their empire, this is during decolonialization, the British Empire transitioned from a physical empire to a financial empire and moved heavily into offshore banking. That's how you got these kind of, BVI, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Jersey, all these kind of British offshore banking hubs. And with London as the capital of international finance, the British Empire was effectively able to maintain a comparable level of imperial vassal state control without having physical troops or physical territorial control. And so the Vatican Bank has lost a lot of its rank, I would say, in the international finance system since the 1940s because the market's so saturated now with offshore banking hubs. But that explains what's happening in this Larry Summers, Jeffrey Epstein exchange.
One of the weirder things about these files is there's some stuff in there that you go, okay, one thing that we know happens is when something is true, a bunch of stuff gets attached to it that's both not true and also preposterous. That allows you to sort of dismiss all of it together. There's a lot of people thought about that with Pizzagate. And there's some stuff that I saw online that was like George W. Bush was like involved in ritual sacrifice or things along those lines, like killing babies and...
But wasn't that the point, though, to completely distract people and like send them in a direction that was so crazy that even if you reference anything about the topic, you'd be like, oh, well, that's just crazy talk. You know, the whole like Comet Ping Pong, where they had all the weird stuff in it. Yeah. And it's, from what I understand, that was the whole thing. It's like they actually were pretty close to something because Epstein's Island was right there. And Pizzagate was just pretty much right on track with the elites getting, doing this sort of thing. Gross.
eating people.
Such a gross time. But yeah, this is where it got weird, like the spirit cooking. But there was that, I can't remember her name. It was like, what was with all the pictures? This was before AI. I mean, I'm sure they could have been photoshopped, but there were a lot of weird pictures of her, like, around a table of, like, I guess it was like a mock human body where there was like food in it, but it was like, it looked like you're eating its insides. It was grotesque shit, but I don't know. It was weird. Sold me at the time because I didn't know what was real. I still don't know what's real, but yeah, that one was out there.
And wild shit.
Yeah.
What do you think that stuff is?
Yeah, what is that?
I don't know. I don't.
Do you think it really occurs?
What I'll say is,
I'm very curious with this answer because it's like, it's out there. It is out there. So where does it come from? And it seems like these elites participate in this stuff. I don't know. What is it?
this is a bad week to be a total Pizzagate denialist. You would feel a lot more comfortable about.
See what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I think they were onto something, and then I don't know who gets a hold of it. The CIA, the FBI, they divert it in a certain direction where it's like they're getting too close to the Epstein files. Send them in this direction, so it sounds crazy.
About it a week ago than you would this week. I don't particularly focus, or I don't want to say care. I don't. My knowledge set on it is a lot more limited on it because I don't think it's a central crux of political influence. I don't know if it's kind of almost a inside joke in a certain way. Jeffrey Epstein himself in these emails is unbelievably trolly. You know, he'll say things that are the kind of, shit posts you
It actually is trolly. I think he's talking about the Bannon interview that we watched the other day. It's weird. Like when he asks him about, like, are you the devil incarnate or something like that? He's like, no, I got a real good mirror or something like that. It's just really weird answers.
You say to a buddy or your brother or something that you don't
just off the wall
mean.
Right.
It's
You're
tongue,
fucking around.
tongue in
Yeah.
cheek.
Yeah. When
But
this is a serious conversation.
If you were a cynical, out to get you person who somehow obtained that text message, you'd say, "Oh, look, he said it." And so there's a lot of that going on. But the fact is I've seen a lot of images shared around the time period of when Pizzagate was popping off in 2016 that all I'll say is it doesn't look good or easily explainable. At the same time, a lot of those screenshots I have not, for most of these, for the things I've posted about or that I'm talking about here, I've gone to the Justice Department file. I've looked up the file number, confirmed whether or not the screenshot is actually what it is. For those, I have not yet, but
There was something about an office downstairs where, like, there was a computer, because I had a buddy tell me about it, and I'm like, I don't know. It was a lot of wild theories. He was really into it, but it was a little over my head.
I wouldn't feel totally confident saying there's no there, but that's about as far as I can go on that.
When
but,
you say images, what are you talking about?
Well, there's a lot of, if you look up pizza, for example, it's just as a keyword
The codes.
search, you'll see, or cheese or something. It looks like, in the DOJ data.
It is suspicious, but we don't have a smoking gun on anything, so it's like you can't make these claims. Only the left does that.
Database for these new files. You'll see a lot of things of people talking about pizza in a way that
It seems like a
it's
code
kind of impossible
to imagine it's actually
to
just
do to
pizza.
a pizza. It's about
Okay.
You know what I mean? But I don't. To me, there's so much real world provable things in there, and also so many kind of more real world implications of allegations that are made in the files that kind of should be explained. Like a common mistake that I see going around social media this week is people. It kind of gets to the reason that the FBI and the president was arguing that these files shouldn't be released in the first place, which is that people would take things out of context and wildly, and think things are true that are not because they're baseless allegations made by, some anonymous tipster. But because it's in an FBI file, people will think it's true. Now, I don't think that's a reason not to release these. I'm extremely glad these were released. What I'm saying is I've seen that phenomenon, run away, and some of this I know is kind of baseless in terms of the factual evidence, because some of the people, one of the confidential human sources, for example, that is cited, the first day of the drop, there was this kind of bombshell claim I think this is probably the most viral post the first day of the DOJ release, which was a confidential human source, a CHS, means an FBI informant, who the FBI internal memo describes how this confidential human source reported that Alan Dershowitz was a Mossad agent, and after every meeting, he goes back and tells his Mossad handlers, what they talked about. And you go, oh my God, it's an FBI confidential human source. The FBI wouldn't, pay an informant unless they found them credible for this sort of thing. On the very next page of the files, it says, President Trump, I'm paraphrasing, you can pull this up if you want. President Trump is controlled by the government of Israel, and they have, I forget if he says they have blackmail or something to this effect. Now, I don't know whether either of those things are true or not. I don't know what, any more than anybody else who's done research on this. Certainly there's a lot of overlap between Dershowitz and the Israeli government and high-level Israeli officials. So in that sense, if that were to be reported, I don't know that it would be who knows about whether that's true or not. But it plays into a kind of confirmation bias that a lot of people have. And so when you see that in an FBI file, the first thing your instinct is, if you're, if that's your journalism beat, is to write all about it and get millions of views. And same thing, there's a MAGA civil war right now that's happening over issues around Israel. It's, you say, oh my God, it's been proven, the FBI knows that, well, Ken Silva, who's a journalist, shortly after that published a tweet containing a file that had much less engagement, where he said, actually, I actually have a copy of this document. And again, I'm paraphrasing here, where it matches that document file number. It's got the same text, and it looks like that confidential human source is Chuck Johnson. Now, I saw that, and I went, oh my God. Because one morning, I woke up to a text from that very person saying, this is about 2 years ago, I'd never met him, never talked to him, don't have his number. Somehow he got mine and messaged me on Signal to turn myself in because I'm going to prison. He then proceeded to look up my ex-wife and make allegations that I was a Mossad agent because she was a prostitute from a foreign country and involved in all these, Mossad black ops type things. Now, he didn't even get the name right. He found a different person with a similar spelling that, was, I guess, busted for prostitution or something, and then makes these giant claims on social media that, I have been married to a foreign spy prostitute or something. And then he goes on to message someone he thinks is my donor and threaten them to cut off funds because if he doesn't, then I've made the intelligence community very angry, and they have deputized him to tell the person he thought was my donor that the intelligence services of the United States of America will crush the businesses of someone he thought was my donor if he doesn't cut off the funds he thought that person was giving to me. Okay? This is that confidential human source, or at least according to the reporting of Ken Silva. the level of things that are untrue about that, combined with the fact that this very person is going around saying that he's not just an FBI informant, but that he actually can direct the intelligence agencies of the United States to crush someone's private practice if they don't change their discretionary donations to someone. Like, that's the person you're saying that person's comments to a FBI officer or task force prove these claims about Dershowitz and Trump? I mean, that's ridiculous. I know firsthand that there's zero credibility to those claims. Now, they may be true or not, but the fact is there's a lot of context to all of these. What is, just because it's said in an FBI file does not make it true. We learned that lesson in Russiagate. We learned that lesson with the Steele dossier. But that, I think that same sort of caution and prudence should be applied with these. And I think ultimately the truth wins out on these things. It just, takes longer than you might want to.
It's so tangled. The whole thing is just, I think everybody who looks at it realizes this is a rabbit hole that just goes to the center of the earth. And there's so many people involved in that. Here's the big question that people ask. If there was a Jeffrey Epstein, and it seems like all these things he was involved in, is there a Jeffrey Epstein right now that we don't know about?
There's a million of them.
A million of them.
I mean, this is why I find this. This is not the core of what I focus on, but I find it a really interesting field of study because it helps understand so many other U.S. government institutions and the relationship between government and private business. Jeffrey Epstein is part of a class of what are effectively professional fixers.
What's up?
And this is a kind of class of professional who sits not really within a particular government or private sector institution, but in the kind of sticky layer between them that connects them all. And I would say that, for example, people like Mark Rich, Bruce Rappaport, and I can go through all these figures and who they are, Robert Mayhew and these types, are just good case studies in how the intelligence world, the business community, uses. Let's take an example of Bruce Rappaport, and this is you can pull up on screen if you want. There's a great article. I think it's called. I think it's from 1988 or 1991. It's called "Intrigue in High Places." Oil pipeline, Iraq, and then just Bruce Rappaport. It's RAPP. Yeah, here you go. Pipeline deal, intrigue in high places. And I'll describe what happens here in a second. In fact, there's a great YouTube video on this as well. If you look up Bruce, just on YouTube, Bruce Rappaport, 1988, there's a great kind of couple-minute summary of all of this. But effectively what happened was, and let me start this by just Jeffrey Epstein got to Bear Stearns in 1976, and then worked there until 1980. Sorry, just because you have it on screen, maybe I'll go through this first, and then I'll do the Jeffrey Epstein connections. So what happened here was you had the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, and Henry Kissinger had a really great quote about this because he asked, what is the U.S. government strategy on this? Because it's very convoluted. And why are we giving weapons to Iran when the Iranian Revolution just happened in 1979 that overthrew what was a U.S. government-friendly government that was partially installed by the CIA in 1953. We've now declared an international arms embargo on them. we're basically at war with the Ayatollahs. Why are we giving them weapons and helping them, defeat Iraq? And the issue was we were also in a kind of war over regional hegemony and oil with Iraq. And so Henry Kissinger's quote was, "My only wish is that both sides could lose." And so what happened was because we didn't want Iraq to take over Iran and become effectively bigger than Saudi Arabia in the region, we were funding and giving weapons to Iran to try to fend off the much bigger Iraqi army. And then at a certain point in this, we began to back Iraq. We went back and forth supporting Iraq. And so this Iraq, because of the embargoes on it, wanted to build a pipeline to get its oil out, and it was going to pass through Jordan, and it was going to abut against the border of Israel. And a major CIA contractor and CIA-connected private business called Bechtel, highly, highly influential company. There's been many, many, many books written on Bechtel. And Bechtel is alive and well today. If there was a saga, for example, around the Stanford Internet Observatory, around the censorship industrial complex, when I visited the Stanford Internet Observatory and I went into the courtyard is sponsored by Bechtel. I think it's called the Bechtel Courtyard. But what happened was the Bechtel was promised by Iraq $1 billion contract in 80s money for constructing this pipeline. And the Central Intelligence Agency and the White House National Security Council, both for geostrategic reasons, wanted this pipeline built. The problem was they were afraid the Israeli government was going to sabotage the pipeline because Iraq was very hostile to Israel, and there was a lot of tension between the Iraqi government and the Israeli government. And they were afraid that if Bechtel got this contract and built this pipeline, that Israel would these pipelines are very fragile, and because it passes close to it, it's very possible that would happen. It would destroy both the CIA's goal and the private profiteer Bechtel's goal. So, how do you solve that problem? Well, what the CIA did is what the National Security Council, which is the interagency that the CIA reports to, did is they engaged a private fixer named Bruce Rappaport, who was a Swiss billionaire with close ties to the Israeli government, to back channel with the Israeli government some sort of secret agreement that would guarantee that they would not sabotage the pipeline. And because the Attorney General of the United States, now again, think about this as well. As I'm saying this, think about Jeffrey Epstein and think about the character of Bill Barr, for example, who started his career for 7 years at the CIA, was highly involved in the CIA's Iran-Contra, and then was Attorney General both in the 1990s during the Epstein-connected BCCI scandal and when Jeffrey Epstein killed himself or whatever happened to him. What happens is Bruce Rappaport does indeed use his contacts with the Israeli government to strike an agreement that then allows would allow the project to be greenlit, but it triggers a special prosecutor's investigation of the Attorney General himself, Ed Meese, because one of his friends was alleged to be in on the deal. So they argued that effectively that through Bruce Rappaport, the Attorney General was striking a secret agreement with Israel to profit himself, a massive conflict of interest. And what ended up happening is Bruce Rappaport stepped forward and said, no, it wasn't to profit. The terms weren't to profit the friend. It was the terms we secretly reached with Israel is that they were going to get like a 30% cut on the revenue of the pipeline, and that's what secured the buy-in. But the fact is Bruce Rappaport was not Now, the other part of this is that the National Security Council told basically the overseas development arm of the U.S. government, formal U.S. government agency, to put American taxpayer funds to help subsidize the pipeline, the Bechtel pipeline, and that government agency did not want to put up something like $400 million of taxpayer funds on it because they thought Bruce Rappaport was a very shady Epstein-like figure who had all sorts of sordid, details about his own past. So that government agency queried the CIA for all records about Bruce Rappaport. And the CIA gave them a limited hangout. They said, we only have a few documents that are responsive to it and no red flags. As it turned out, what the special prosecutor compelled from the CIA is that they had a whole dirty dossier on Bruce Rappaport. And if they had given that to the U.S. government agency, there couldn't have been support for the pipeline. Now, after all this scandal, the pipeline ended up not being built. But the point is here you have the same type of person as Jeffrey Epstein, the same regions and countries that are involved in a significant part of the Epstein saga. You have the same structure of the intelligence community, private businesses, and back channel deals with government officials. But because there was no 201 file on Bruce Rappaport, he was not formally a CIA asset. He was what's called a liaison, a contact, a facilitator, a friend of the station. Doesn't work for the CIA. He's got his own hedge fund. He's got his own, basically finance. He'll invest in commodities or foreign exchange or private portfolio companies. But sometimes he'll work with the CIA. Sometimes he won't. Depends on whether it's good for him. And in this case, he thought it was good for him to take this. Who knows what cut he himself got on it. But the fact is here you have the same type of operation. You have every layer of this, from the Justice Department to the CIA to the private financiers to the private companies to real-world geopolitical action. And this appears, in my view of it, to be exactly the model that Jeffrey Epstein himself replicated and was on parallel track with for his whole career. He's and I can get into that, but does that make sense in terms of this type of figure exists in basically in every country, in every industry, and they're not all as prominent as Epstein, but I would argue people like Mark Rich and at the time Bruce Rappaport kind of were. They don't all have these child sex trafficking
that's the thing.
Type things.
This is the thing is what he was connected with. It makes me wonder, if he didn't have that sick thing where he liked underage girls, if he'd never gotten arrested, which was 2008 or something. When did he initially get arrested?
2006, but
2006.
but he was the plea deal was 2008. Yeah.
So if that hadn't happened, if you just got a guy who's getting of age prostitutes, we probably never hear about this.
Yeah. And
this episode is brought to you by Squarespace. To level up your business, you got to level up your website, and Squarespace does the heavy lifting for you. Even I use it to power my website.
80, when he was involved in a deal, I think it was St. Joe's Mineral Company, which is owned by Seagram's, which was owned by the Bronfman family. He got in trouble with the SEC at that time. He then, as soon as he got in trouble, he left Bear Stearns and went out on his own, but then worked effectively at Bear Stearns off the book for the next decade, according to his own testimony. He had a continuous relationship with Bear Stearns for, I think he said 31 years. It was basically from the moment, from the 1970s, 1976 until 2007, 2008, when Bear Stearns collapsed while Jeffrey Epstein was in jail.
Yeah, I keep hearing about Bear Stearns. I've actually, honestly, never even heard of that until about a week ago. Oh, God, I'm getting it.
But then Jeffrey Epstein it appears to me almost impossible that Jeffrey Epstein was not working on BCCI pipeline deals while he was at Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was one of the three biggest clearinghouses for BCCI transactions. BCCI is the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. Sometimes people call it the Bank of Crooks and Criminals International. It's an incredible saga of CIA banking gone wrong. It's a bank that was started in Pakistan in 1972 and then grew to be the CIA's main way to covertly back the Mujahideen against the Russians during the Cold War. So we backed Osama bin Laden, the CIA. We backed the Islamic Mujahideen, the radicals who became Al-Qaeda and ISIS, with billions of dollars of CIA and MI6 and Israeli and Saudi facilitated co-support and financial funds in order to do a Cold War operation, just like we talked about with strange bedfellows, backing right-wing organized crime to stop left-wing communism. We did the same thing in Afghanistan through the Pakistan-Afghanistan border to covertly run guns to the Mujahideen. In fact, there's a great YouTube video that I always like to play so that you can see it for yourself. It's really short. You can look up 1979 Zbigniew Brzezinski dropping out of a helicopter to tell the Mujahideen that both God and the United States government is on their side. And the reason this clip I always think is so fun to play is because this was the very moment in 1979 that Jeffrey Epstein appears to have been involved in the BCCI financing of this very operation. So if you turn the volume up and you start at the beginning.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Now that is the National Security Advisor of the United States of America. The National Security Advisor is the highest post in the cabinet. It is the person the president talks to every day. All intelligence, war, military, and statecraft goes through the National Security Advisor. That is the numero uno. And he personally, in 1979, this didn't come out until years later, but we were covertly doing this. So to do a covert operation, and this is why I focus on the money side of Epstein from the 1970s to present, because the money in any covert operation is the most essential part. It's the only thing that is irreplaceable, and that if you don't have it, everything goes away. You lose one person, find another one. You lose one, logistics hub, can create another one with money. You lose money, you lose everything. You lose your ability to pay your informants. You lose your ability to bribe government officials. You lose your ability to, win the support of local institutions. We lost Vietnam, not really so much because we lost, at the kinetic war level, but because we lost the ability to fund it because it got defunded. So we literally couldn't do it anymore. And there's another great clip just to show how sophisticated CIA money laundering was even by the 1960s. Sorry, I'll stop doing this after running around clip to clip after this, or I'll chill on it. But if you go to my X account, you can also find this on YouTube. There's a great, I believe it was CBS in the 1960s. It's called In the Pay I think it's called In the Pay of the CIA, or in the but if you type in CIA money laundering, you'll see this great clip about how sophisticated CIA money laundering was already by the 1950s and 60s.
I bet.
And because everything the CIA does has to be laundered. It's a spy agency. If it writes a check, if it doesn't conceal the origins of the money, gigs up. So everything that is CIA has to move through some sort of money laundering mechanism. Well, to kind of, I guess, borrow a phrase from the president, somebody's doing the money laundering. You need outside contacts who do not work at the agency or necessarily for the agency to facilitate that money laundering.
Yeah.
And that was done through, for example, the Pakistanis with BCCI as well as contacts in London. That is what I believe Jeffrey Epstein was doing his entire career after that, from Towers Financial to his tenure with Leslie Wexner, to kind of the way I think that he helped model the Clinton Foundation itself with the Clintons in the early 2000s. And his expertise in
Minute
that,
and a half.
I think, is what made him useful. Really not, well, it's more the connections of, I guess, donors and billionaires around him that made him the most useful. But the fact is
Twigs.
he specialized, when he went out on his own, formally he leaves Bear Stearns in 1981 and starts a one-man group called Intercontinental Assets Group out of his New York City apartment. He's not even 30 years old. Right away, he gets big-level clients like Adnan Khashoggi, who is at the time was alleged to be the world's richest man. He was the Saudi arms dealer, and to give an impression of how significant this figure was in the weapons trade, he was he earned more in commissions from Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and I think one of the other big military contractors than every other commissions agent in the entire world combined. That's why, there were rumors that he was the world's richest man. In fact, we actually had legislation passed because of how influential he was. He was the one who, in 1983, flew to the National Security Council, to the White House, to
I'm not going to make it.
orchestrate the Iran-Contra affair. He was the Saudi middleman that
It's right there.
was part of this operation where the United States used the Saudi middleman, Adnan Khashoggi, to run guns to Israeli contacts to smuggle into Iran to fight off the Iraqis. It's a bit of a long sequence, but effectively you can think of it as the United States and Israel with Saudi Arabia in the middle. Now, Adnan Khashoggi was one of the major...
What's with all these Khashoggis? I feel like there's a lot of them because the journalists, the one under Obama that he kind of...
clients of the CIA's BCCI bank, and he was the host of the CIA's offshore operation that was created in 1976 called the Safari Club. In 1975, 1976, when the CIA started getting handcuffs put on it with the Church Committee hearings, Jeffrey Epstein starts his career at Bear Stearns in 1976, the very moment of the biggest shakeup of the CIA in CIA history. At that moment, the Church Committee hearings were ongoing, and the public was seeing,
the fuck is going on?
Colby and Angleton holding up a heart attack gun. How the CIA can kill someone and make it look like they died organically of a heart attack. Operation Chaos had just broke about the CIA funding student groups on American college campuses. COINTEL broke. MK Ultra broke. It was one house of horrors after another on everybody's TV that only had 3 news stations. And so Democrats...
Imagine that. Hearing about all of that actually through one news channel back when there were actually journalists and they weren't shills paid off.
Were completely fired up about getting rid of the CIA or putting massive handcuffs on it, which is what they did. They created effectively what's now the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, so there's oversight of the CIA by the the people's representatives. The first year Carter was in office in 1977, went through what was called the Halloween Massacre, fired 30% of all CIA operations personnel. They massively cut funding.
I remember hearing about it.
And so in response to this, you had a set of stakeholders who wanted that CIA dirty work to still be doable, but they didn't have the legal authorization to run it out of the CIA. So what they did is they took the same group of international partners that the CIA had been working with. That includes Saudi Arabia, Israel, the UK, France, at the time Iran, because this was before the 1979 Iranian Revolution. They were all part of this thing called the Safari Club, which got its name from the Mount Safari. It was basically a resort club in Kenya, which was the main hub. Just like Colombia, for example.
There was a strip club in Portland, here in Portland, that was named the Safari Club. That's funny.
It's kind of the main U.S. government hub for logistics.
By the way,
it was kind of a foothold for our ability to do
it's
work
not there
in
anymore. Used to be by
Venezuela
Hopworks.
or Guatemala or Nicaragua or Brazil. In Africa, Kenya was our main stronghold. And so, but Adnan Khashoggi ran that. This was basically a 7-8 country joint covert operations intelligence network. And it was informal. It wasn't technically the CIA. And it was set up in. You can pull the Wikipedia for this, actually, just so you don't need to take my word for it. Like, literally, the sanitized Wikipedia will tell you everything that I'm saying here. And that network ended up becoming one of the main. Yeah. So if you start at the top, you'll see that there it is on the right, the Safari Club. It was a covert alliance of intelligence services formed in 1976 that ran clandestine operations in Africa. Now, what they're leaving out here is that it was also Asia. It played a huge role in Pakistan and Afghanistan and the like. But these were all these different countries.
So it's basically, you just have forces over there by proxy. It's kind of like you're just propping them up. It seems like we've been doing that a lot. It's like how many different operations under different names that we've been doing of that, pretty much that same concept.
Attempt to offset the restrictions that the Democrats had put on the CIA. When Reagan gets back to power in 1981, you still have these handcuffs on the CIA. You still have the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives. The Democrats did, so there was an international arms embargo.
Oh, hi, guy.
First of all, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution happens, and it's blamed on the CIA being cut back. The CIA helped install the Shah in 1953. They argued that if Jimmy Carter hadn't destroyed the CIA, we would still have Iran as a friendly country. We could have stopped this. We could have nipped it in the bud. We could have had people on the ground. It's Jimmy Carter's fault that he cut the CIA, that we're in this disaster with the world's third largest reserve of oil and gas and this hugely geostrategic country now being an enemy of America rather than a friend. So an international arms embargo was put on Iran, but then Iraq threatened to invade it. And we didn't want Iraq to take it over. So we had to do something illegal if we wanted to help Iran. And it was against international law to give them weapons. But if we didn't give them weapons, it was perceived massive geostrategic, geopolitical earthquake that we'd live with for centuries. So you had to do one illegal action with the gun running. And then there was an inter-party dispute. The Democrats at that time, the majority did not want to do intervention in Nicaragua. There was an in-party power called the Sandinista government, and there was a rebel faction called the Contras. And Republican donors and stakeholders had interests in Nicaragua and wanted to help the Contras overthrow the Sandinista government. But there was a party dispute. Democrat donors didn't profit from that, and they at the time had a fairly robust anti-imperialism kind of mindset and were sick of CIA regime change by the early 1980s after everything that was disclosed in just the previous years. So Republicans wanted to overthrow the Nicaraguan governments. Democrats didn't. Democrats had a House majority, and they passed something called the Bolin Amendment, which forbade any U.S. government funds from going to support the Contras. So this put the Republicans in a pickle. By the way, this is what's happening kind of today around Ukraine if you flip the parties. 100% of Democrats vote for Ukraine funding. The Republican Party is split about it. This is the inverse of that was happening in the early 1980s. 100% of Republicans wanted to fund the Contras against what they called the Soviet-aligned Sandinistas. And the Democrats were split. But they successfully passed this Bolin Amendment, so the CIA was in a pickle. How do you run guns to Iran when it's against international law? And how do you fund the Contras when it's illegal to spend U.S. government money to fund them? And so what they came up with is effectively the structure. I think it's the most useful structure for understanding American statecraft and intelligence activity to this day. What they came up with is what they called a structure called the Enterprise, which the CIA Director Bill Casey referred to as a private, self-sustained, off-the-shelf, standalone entity that did not exist within the U.S. government, but was instead, it comprised, the money came from outside fixers who would then effectively channel donor money and black market trade to fund the Contras. So the money didn't come from U.S. taxpayers. It didn't come from U.S. aid. It didn't come from an allocation from the U.S. Department of War or foreign assistance from the Department of State. As it turned out, the money came from, cocaine and a couple of other things. But this was the famous
Freeway Ricky Ross.
Yeah, Gary Webb.
Yeah.
John Kerry, and this was the soup that Jeffrey Epstein was coming up in. And a funny story related to this is that the main airline used to transport the drugs and guns in the drugs for cash for guns operation
Was it his plane?
was a CI proprietary airline called Southern Air Transport.
Oh, I was way off.
Southern Air Transport was the proprietary CIA airline, meaning it was owned and operated exclusively by the Central Intelligence Agency. And it was the airliner that all these aircraft moved through. Iran-Contra was basically the early 1980s up until like the mid-late 1980s. It was based in Miami. In 1994, Southern Air Transport, the CIA proprietary airline, which in the intervening time was spun out to not be owned by the CIA, but rather to be owned by someone who had worked for the CIA. At the time, it was owned by the CIA, so pretty thin layer there. But it moved from Miami to Columbus, Ohio, primarily to service the limited.
Oh, I know all about this, Joe.
I have a video on this. And in fact,
look over at Jay because he's obsessed.
Yeah, and in
he's
fact,
obsessed with Patel.
Yeah, I probably told you about this 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's a great article. I think Spook Air, and on this. But
how many roads lead back to Ohio?
Most. Most, if not all.
What is this connection with Ohio?
Well, Ohio was, if you remember, kind of the origins of organized crime in the United States really goes back to the Prohibition era, when you had
The F was that?
this Midwestern mafia syndicate around Cincinnati, and then it moved into Dayton and Columbus and adjacent to Chicago, and this whole sort of hub around Prohibition. And then Prohibition was 1920 to 1933. When Prohibition ended, all these networks went from black market alcohol to black market drugs because it was no longer black market. They no longer had a business smuggling alcohol, so they moved into the narcotics space.
Which ones? Which narcotics?
Well, it was primarily opium in the 1930s. This was part of
opium. Really?
Well, yeah. Because in the 1930s was when you
50?
had, as we discussed, the Department of War's alliance with Chiang Kai-shek
Means I gotta double up.
the Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalists.
Had enough.
The supply for, the supply for heroin, for example, or opium, it comes from Asia. It comes from the Golden Crescent, the Golden Triangle, and the way this logistics chain moved was our CIA, War Department-backed rebel groups in Asia.
Chitin.
They sat territorially on the Golden Triangle.
We need that chitin powder.
They would cultivate the opium. They would basically fly it out on military aircraft. It went to Europe for processing. In France was one of the main. This kind of French connection saga, which again Jeffrey Epstein is weirdly connected to, and I can tell you about that if you're interested. And then it would go to the basically Italian mafia folks for the transshipment, and you had Italian mafia controlled docks and ports in the United States and New York and New Jersey, and you had CIA protected Italian mafia groups in southern Italy, which at the time were national security protected because they were our allies against the communists. And so you had this drug trade to support foreign policy imperatives. And you can do that, you can run that exercise with pretty much every drug on planet Earth at this point. And it makes it very difficult to stop the drug trade, because by stopping the drug trade, you're running up against something that your own government considers a perhaps unfortunate but necessary logistics hub.
Do you think that's happening right now with Mexico?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, I mean, think about this. Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
That wasn't that long ago.
The Fast and Furious story is fucking bananas.
It's interesting.
Tell it to people that don't know.
A little bit of the Obama administration selling weapons to the cartels, I think.
No, because just the idea that they proposed this and implemented it is so fucking crazy.
Yeah. Well, so this was a scandal during the Obama administration. Eric Holder was the Attorney General of the United States. He had to step down because he was held in contempt of Congress for jumping on the grenade and not turning over the Fast and Furious files. Earth to Congress, note to Congress, who wants to be a hero, by the way? You can do the same thing with the Epstein bill with the Fast and Furious files. I think everybody in this war on drugs that we're so gung-ho about, we just captured the president of Venezuela over drugs, it would be awfully nice if you compelled the Justice Department and FBI to turn over the Justice Department and FBI run Fast and Furious files. But what happened was, and I believe this had interagency approval, meaning the White House signed off on it, the Central Intelligence Agency signed off on it, the Department of Defense signed off on it, the State Department signed off on it, the FBI and ATF signed off on it. This was a gun-running operation to send guns to the Sinaloa cartel to have them be able to successfully win a narco drug war against the Los Zetas cartel. The Los Zetas cartel was pilfering oil pipelines. Remember, Mexico, the oil wealth of the United States is vastly disproportionately concentrated in Texas. In West Texas and Southern Texas, where it shares oil fields with Mexico, effectively. Those oil fields go into Mexico is replete with oil. And there are many partnerships between United States oil companies and the Mexican government, Pemex and all the different, kind of private lines. And this is a big point of geopolitical contention. But the fact is one of the things that organized crime groups do in order to get money for their own syndicate, because they've got effectively military control of a territory, is if a pipeline runs through that territory, they can simply cut open the pipeline and steal the oil. This is, for example, what was happening with our CIA-backed rebel groups in Syria. We're taking the oil. I mean, we would literally, our spunky moderate rebels would, literally cut open Syrian pipelines and take the oil. And this was one of the ways to support it. You can support it with drugs. You can support it with black market oil. And by the way, while I'm on the topic, if you pull up, and I have this on my X, if you type in Institute for Peace, or just type in Institute Peace drugs, the U.S. government, the U.S. Institute for Peace, told the Taliban not to shut down the drug trade after they took power in 2022. They said it would have a devastating, negative impact on the local economy if they didn't keep growing what was then, 95% of the, I think click the next image. Next image. Yeah, here you go. So this is a we give the U.S. Institute of Peace, at the time we gave them $55 million a year. The U.S. Institute of Peace was created by act of Congress in 1984.
This headline is wild. The Taliban's successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world.
Yes. Right.
It's funny when they try to gaslight with nothing but it's almost like they're the first time they've ever tried to start a fire with two rocks, and it's like they're trying to gaslight us with that, and that's what these headlines turn out to be. The Taliban's successful opium ban is bad for Afghans and the world. It's like, what sort? I'm really trying my best to just steel man in my own head, and Are you using the black market argument, like the cartel argument? It was like, well, I mean, if they ban it, that just means it's going to go, into alleyways and stuff like that. I guess that's the only thing I can think of with that one.
Right. So
wow.
Now remember, just about, the Taliban had just taken back power. That happened in the early Biden administration. The Taliban, if folks recall, the CIA was and the U.S. military, as well as their allies and with regional allies, were cultivating the opium on the Golden Crescent for a noble cause, to win the Cold War against the evil Soviets. This was a big part of the funding for the Mujahideen. And this was one of the big scandals that ended up enveloping BCCI, the CIA's bank, because it was non-compliant with any banking regulations. It all moved offshore. The drug money, the drug logistics chain that the CIA built for the Mujahideen then moved through the drugs money laundering chain at the CIA bank, and this apparatus had scaled for 20 years by the late 1990s, when the Taliban, like the Chinese, wanted to shut it down when the Taliban took power in the 1990s. And they did that. They cut the opium down to effectively zero in 1999, and this is all open source. And then, we invade Afghanistan in 2001, 2003. It becomes a U.S. military occupied zone, and it goes from 0% of the world's heroin to 95% of the world's heroin, all under U.S. military occupation. In fact, we installed their dictator, whose brother was the main drug kingpin of the whole country. And some of this moved through the Cold War CIA-backed Turkish Grey Wolves outfit. And there's a funny quote, I think, in the Michael Hastings article on Stanley McChrystal, where Stanley McChrystal's team refers to Hamid Karzai's funny little hat that he wore. Hamid Karzai was the CIA installed, strongman after we took over Afghanistan. He referred to his hat as the Grey Wolf's vagina. I mean, they're basically saying, like, this is the, the drug logistics orifice. But leaving that aside, what I'm getting to is you have this
anyway.
banking network. You have all these logistics chains. Jeffrey Epstein, his first 10 when his come up is made through this whole network.
Such a banger.
It turns out that Bear Stearns, opened a trading desk to clear BCCI transactions in 1978. Jeffrey Epstein's mentor, the person who actually recruited him to apply to Bear Stearns, was a guy named Ace Greenberg. Ace Greenberg then was a senior executive at the time, and then I think in 1978 or 1979 he becomes CEO, so the head of Bear Stearns. So he sets Jeffrey Epstein up with his daughter. So Jeffrey Epstein is a young kid. People wonder, how did Jeffrey Epstein make partner at Bear Stearns so fast? Well, there's a couple explanations. One is the guy who brought him into the firm quickly became CEO thereafter, and Jeffrey Epstein was dating his daughter. The New York Times actually reported this about a month and a half ago by getting the insider testimony of a dozen people who worked at Bear Stearns at the time. And so, he's dating the boss's daughter, but also Ace Greenberg, as the CEO, would have to approve all of these transactions, and it looks like was involved in, these clearinghouse activities. What happened was Bear Stearns cleared about $13 billion worth of BCCI transactions, and it looks like these transactions were involved in the very same Adnan Khashoggi, so Saudi, and Doug Leese, who was a British arms dealer that Jeffrey Epstein was flying to London to meet with and working with all those years. And Bear Stearns was doing it through this entity called Capcom, which was
the company
the Senate report on the BCCI scandal referred to as the bank within the bank of BCCI. So kind of the inner sanctum of. Now that Capcom was owned by Kamal Adam, who was the head of. He was the chief spy for Saudi Arabia. So Bear Stearns.
Was it Dalseem?
The New York Times reports based on a dozen of these, insider, testimonies. They got like 3 of Epstein's bosses on the record to talk about, what he was doing there. Amazingly, the New York Times does not mention a single deal name in the entire 20,000 word report.
Why do you think that is?
It might not be news fit to print. Also, they just I can be charitable and say they just might not know. They might think that, I don't think that the New York Times has a pinky of the specialization in Jeffrey Epstein cinematic universe knowledge that your random anonymous egg account on X has. So they might not know about Bear Stearns doing BCCI transactions. They might not know what, if you don't know the material, you don't necessarily know what to ask. That's me being charitable. Also, some of the witnesses may have said that they don't want to talk about specific deal names because that would tarnish, the folks involved in that deal for association with Jeffrey Epstein. There could be a lot of reasons. I'm trying to be charitable here, but the fact is they all said Jeffrey Epstein moved up so fast because he was dating the boss's daughter and he was put on the biggest and most lucrative deals very quickly within the firm. And given the incredible volume that Bear Stearns appears to have been moving through BCCI, and
oh my God,
BCCI being
not ready for that.
The hottest ticket in town then in the late 1970s, it was literally the main vehicle for the U.S. government to covertly launder funds.
I'm not
Capcom, according to the Senate intelligence report and The Justice Department investigations was the main vehicle for funding the Mujahideen. 50% of those trades, and they laundered it illegally, which requires a brokerage, a clearinghouse to prove it. The way this is set up is you have a bank, you've got a money launderer, and you've got a clearinghouse. The bank was the CIA bank, BCCI. The money launderer was the CIA's literal direct partner in this, the Saudis. Capcom was run by the chief Saudi spy master. And then in 1982, Jeffrey Epstein obtained a fake Saudi passport. It was a fake Austrian passport because that was a big loophole passport during the Cold War for spies. But it said his residence was Saudi Arabia. We didn't find this out until 2019 when his safe was raided. But at that exact time, Jeffrey Epstein has this fake Saudi passport. And it's being done to support the CIA-backed rebel group, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. But that requires a clearinghouse to clear those money laundering trades. They were using these mirrored commodities trades, which is this technique of basically selling to yourself to make money look clean, so that it looks like profit, and it looks like you won or lost it in a market trade rather than through drug money. And then they were then sending that on to the Mujahideen. But the fact is at the same time that was happening, Adnan Khashoggi, who had become Jeffrey Epstein's client in the 1980s when he went on his own, was the one facilitating the weapons. You have this drugs for cash for guns. The person, so the bank that's moving that's turning 90. The drugs into clean cash.
Basically there.
That the head of the Saudi spy master is running that part of the banking side. And then you've got the Saudi arms dealer who is moving it illegally into Iran, working hand in glove with the CIA and the National Security Council the whole time. You have a illegal financial enterprise protected at the highest level by the United States government, the U.S. intelligence services, and by proxy, the Justice Department itself. Can you imagine the Justice Department prosecuting it while that operation was ongoing? Any defendant. You asked what are the great reveals
for reserves
in the JFK files, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the case of Rolando Masfer. There's an incredible document in the JFK files that Tulsi Gabbard released last year, which is a CIA document that describes, I think the quote is, massive damage if the Justice Department pursues a criminal case against a guy named Rolando Masfer. If you just type in Rolando Masfer, JFK Files 2025 release, or like massive damage or something like that, you'll see this. It's an unbelievably incredible document. What it documents is that there was a dispute between the CIA and the State Department. The State Department sets foreign policy. The CIA is supposed to serve covertly the State Department. The CIA is the junior seat at the table. Nobody ever goes from being head of the State Department to head of the CIA. That's a demotion. The CIA is supposed to be kind of the, I use like the Sopranos reference. Silvio comes in and shakes down the
my internet sucks down
hairdresser shop or whatever for the money it owes the family. If you are that hairdresser, it's easy to think that Silvio runs the mafia because he's the one who shows up at your house, breaks your windows, breaks your knuckles, and takes your money.
Shit.
But
how long has I been doing that?
Silvio's not doing that because he runs it. He's doing it because the person setting the policy of the enterprise, Tony.
I'm going to have to fuck with this. God damn it. It's just like connecting. I'll have to rewatch this and just, All right, well, we tried. I don't think it did that before. All right, well, we'll see how it goes. I got to go anyway, so much love.